Welcome back, in part 3 of Sega. Anyways, let's continue about this topic.
Despite a 75% drop in half-year profits just before the Japanese launch of the Dreamcast, Sega felt confident about its new system.
The Dreamcast attracted significant interest and drew many pre-orders.
Sega announced that Sonic Adventure, the first major 3D Sonic the Hedgehog game, would be a Dreamcast launch game.
It was promoted with a large-scale public demonstration at the Tokyo Kakuze Forum Hall.
Due to a high failure rate in the manufacturing process, Sega could not ship enough consoles for the Dreamcast's Japanese launch.
As more than half of its limited stock had been pre-ordered, Sega stopped pre-orders in Japan.
Before the launch, Sega announced the release of its new arcade operation machine idea, Naomi Arcade System Board, which served as a cheaper alternative to the Sega Model 3.
Naomi shared technology with the Dreamcast, allowing nearly identical ports of arcade games.
The Dreamcast launched in Japan on November 27, 1998.
The entire stock of 150,000 consoles sold out by the end of the day.
Irimajiri estimated that another 200,000 to 300,000 Dreamcast units could have been sold with sufficient supply.
He hoped to sell more than 1 million Dreamcast units in Japan by February 1999, but less than 900,000 were sold.
The low sales undermined Sega's attempts to build up a sufficient install base to ensure the Dreamcast's survival after the arrival of competition from other manufacturers.
Sega suffered a further 42.881 billion yen consolidated net loss in the fiscal year ending March 1999. Unannounced plans to eliminate 1,000 jobs, nearly a quarter of its workforce.
Before the Western launch, Sega reduced the price of the Dreamcast in Japan by 9,100 yen, effectively making it unprofitable but increasing sales. On August 11, 1999, Sega of America confirmed that Stoller had been fired.
Peter Moore, whom Stoller had hired as a Sega of America executive only 6 months before, was placed in charge of the North American launch.
The Dreamcast launched in North America on September 9, 1999, with 18 games.
Sega set a record by selling more than 225,132 Dreamcast units in 24 hours, earning $98.4 million in what Moore called the biggest 24 hours in entertainment retail history.
Within 2 weeks, US Dreamcast sales exceeded 500,000.
By Christmas, Sega held 31% of the US video game market by revenue.
On November 4, Sega announced it had sold more than 1 million Dreamcast units.
Nevertheless, the launch was marked by a glitch at one of Sega's manufacturing plants, which produced defective GD-ROMs, where data was not properly recorded onto the disk.
Sega released the Dreamcast in Europe on October 14, 1999.
While Sega sold 500,000 units in Europe by Christmas 1999, sales there slowed, and by October 2000 Sega had sold only about 1 million units.
Shenmue became the most expensive game ever developed at the time, reported to have cost Sega $70 million.
In 2011, Suzuki said the figure was closer to $47 million including marketing.
Development also covered some of Shenmue 2, 2001, which was completed for a smaller amount, and groundwork for future Shenmue games. Though the Dreamcast was successful, Sony's PlayStation still held 60% of the overall market share in North America at the end of 1999.
On March 2, 1999, in what one report called a highly publicized, vaporware-like announcement, Sony revealed the first details of the PlayStation 2.
The same year, Nintendo announced that its next console would meet or exceed anything on the market, and Microsoft began development of its own console, the Xbox.
Sega's initial momentum proved fleeting as U.S. Dreamcast sales, which exceeded 1.5 million by the end of 1999, began to decline as early as January 2000.
Poor Japanese sales contributed to Sega's 42.88 billion yen, $404 million, consolidated net loss in the fiscal year ending March 2000.
This followed a similar loss of 42.881 billion yen the previous year and marked Sega's third consecutive annual loss.
Sega's overall sales for the term increased 27.4%, and Dreamcast sales in North America and Europe greatly exceeded its expectations.
However, this coincided with a decrease in profitability due to the investments required to launch the Dreamcast in Western markets and poor software sales in Japan.
At the same time, worsening conditions reduced the profitability of Sega's Japanese arcade business, prompting the closure of 246 locations. Moore became the president and chief operating officer of Sega of America on May 8, 2000.
Whoa!
He said the Dreamcast would need to sell 5 million units in the US by the end of 2000 to remain viable, but Sega fell short of this goal, with some 3 million units sold.
Moreover, Sega's attempts to spur Dreamcast sales through lower prices and cash rebates caused escalating financial losses.
In March 2001, Sega posted a consolidated net loss of 51.7 billion yen, $417.5 million.
While the PlayStation 2's October 26 US launch was marked by shortages, this did not benefit the Dreamcast as much as expected, as many disappointed consumers continued to wait or purchase the PS1.
Eventually, Sony and Nintendo held 50 and 35% of the US video game market, while Sega held only 15%.
CSK chairman Isao Okawa replaced Irimajiri as president of Sega on May 22, 2000.
Okawa had long advocated that Sega abandon the console business.
Others shared this view. Sega co-founder David Rosen had always felt it was a bit of a folly for them to be limiting their potential to Sega hardware, and Stoller had suggested Sega should have sold the company to Microsoft.
In a September 2000 meeting with Sega's Japanese executives and heads of its first-party game studios, Moore and Sega of America executive Charles Belfield recommended that Sega abandon its console business.
In response, the studio heads walked out.
Sega announced an official company name change from Sega Enterprises Limited to Sega Corporation effective November 1, 2000. officially dropping the Sega Enterprises name used in Japan as well as transitioning to the Sega name used globally.
Sega stated in a release that this was to display its commitment to its network entertainment business. On January 23, 2001, Japanese newspaper Nihon Keizai Shimbun reported that Sega would cease production of the Dreamcast and develop software for other platforms.
After an initial denial, Sega released a press release confirming it was considering producing software for the PlayStation 2 and Game Boy Advance as part of its new management policy.
On January 31, 2001, Sega announced the discontinuation of the Dreamcast after March 31 and the restructuring of the company as a platform-agnostic, third-party developer.
Sega also announced a Dreamcast price reduction to eliminate its unsold inventory, estimated at 930,000 units as of April 2001.
This was followed by further reductions to clear the remaining inventory.
The final, manufactured Dreamcast was autographed by the heads of all 9 of Sega's first-party game studios, plus the heads of Sports Game, Developer Visual Concepts and Audio Studio Wavemaster, and given away with all 55 first-party Dreamcast games through a competition organized by GamePro.
Okawa, who had loaned Sega $500 million in 1999, died on March 16, 2001.
Shortly before his death, he forgave Sega's debts to him and returned his $695 million worth of Sega and CSK stock, helping the company survive the third-party transition.
He held failed talks with Microsoft about a sale or merger with its Xbox division.
According to former Microsoft executive Joachim Kenton, Microsoft founder Bill Gates decided against acquiring Sega because he didn't think that Sega had enough muscle to eventually stop Sony.
A business alliance with Microsoft was announced whereby Sega would develop 11 games for the Xbox.
As part of the restructuring, nearly one-third of Sega's Tokyo workforce was laid off in 2001.
2002 was Sega's 5th consecutive fiscal year of net losses. After Okawa's death, Hideki Sato, a 30-year Sega veteran who had worked on Sega's consoles, became the company president.
Following poor sales in 2002, Sega cut its profit forecast for 2003 by 90% and explored opportunities for mergers.
In 2003, Sega began talks with Sammy Corporation, a pachinko and pachislo manufacturing company, and Namco.
The president of Sammy, Hajime Satomi, had been mentored by Okawa and was previously asked to be CEO of Sega.
On February 13, Sega announced that it would merge with Sammy. However, as late as April 17, Sega was still in talks with Namco, which was attempting to overturn the merger.
Sega's consideration of Namco's offer upset Sammy executives.
The day after Sega announced it no longer planned to merge with Sammy, Namco withdrew its offer. In 2003, Sato and COO Tetsuya Kamei stepped down.
Sato was replaced by Hideo Oguchi, the head of the Sega studio hitmaker.
Moore left Sega in January 2003, feeling that the Japanese executives were refusing to adapt to industry changes, such as the demand for mature games such as Grand Theft Auto 3.
Hideki Irie, who had worked at Getakaneski, became the new president and COO of Sega of America in October 2003. We will continue more about Sega in Part 4. Again, stay tuned for more.